You are listening to the Better 2 podcast with DM Needom. Hi gang, Donna here. Today I had the pleasure of interviewing Margaret Ghielmetti. She has a book out called Bravish, a memoir of recovering perfectionist. I know you're going to sit here and say, well, I'm not a perfectionist. Well, I think we all have a little bit of perfectionism in us, whether it be the way we look, oh, our hair's messed up today, or maybe something we've written, or maybe our job, or even the way we raise our kids, or even cook food. We all have that need to be perfect sometimes. But the truth is, perfection is just an illusion. We just all haven't figured that out yet. So today we unpack that. And it's not only about perfectionism. I talked to her about her life because she actually has lived on 4 different continents. Her husband is Swiss, and she's gone to amazing places. So check it out. Hi, Margaret. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Donna, thank you. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. Where are you located generally?
Right now I'm in Chicago.
Oh, so yes, I'm about 80 miles away from you, out in the northwest burbs.
Oh, okay. Hey, neighbor.
Hey, so the weather's not too bad for you.
Very true. It's as you know, it's just gorgeous right now. So enjoying that.
Yeah. So let's go to, but your Better 2 moment deals with you traveling to India. Let's talk about why you went to India to begin with.
Oh, okay. Well, I've been a traveler since I can remember. My mom used to say that I was born with 1 foot rooted in my hometown, which is just north of here, and 1 foot out in the world exploring, which is a kind of an odd visual. I grant you that, a little bit of a river dance thing, but I've always been a traveler. And so for me, anytime someone says, would I like to go explore some part of the world, I have said yes. So this was when my mom was near the end of her life, and she always said to me, go, go out, see the world. A friend suggested that we explore India with him, and he knew India very well. And so even though it was the middle of summer in India, an Indian friend said, don't go, it'll be too hot. We didn't want to miss that opportunity. So that's what took us to India for this particular trip.
Okay. So while you're in India, what led to this Better 2 moment of you had to climb a tower?
Right. Well, with this really super hot and challenging trip, which was amazing, fell totally head over heels in love with India. But after 10 days in a non-air conditioned car in the hottest time of year and seeing every possible sight we could, because I definitely am someone who is subject to FOMO, fear of missing out. I don't want to miss anything. I love to say yes. So we had seen every single site along the way. And after 10 days of that, I was pretty wilted. I was pretty tired. And most people would say, it's okay to take it easy by then. But when we got one more email from an Indian friend who said, oh, you have to add one more thing, this Victory Tower at Chittorgarh, which I'd never heard of. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay. Yes, I will absolutely say yes to that. So we went to this Victory Tower of Chittorgarh. So that's what gets us to the beginning of that Better 2 moment for me.
Okay, so then tell us about the tower.
Okay.
Just
keep on going. Keep on going. Okay. So we're at the base of this tower, and I am really understanding why people compelled us to go there. It was covered with carvings. It was astonishing. I think we were the only non-Indians there, so it's clearly something that Indian people know, but I didn't know. So I really got it, why people suggested it. However, there were a lot of monkeys around the tower. I mean, a ton of monkeys, wild monkeys, and people were kind of acting like they were petting the monkeys, which was freaking me out a little bit because, wild monkeys, maybe not such a great idea. And my husband said, well, let's go up in this tower. It's about a 9-story tower. And I said, okay, I can do that. And, you take your shoes off at every sort of sacred site. And I had taken my shoes off a lot by then. And we started up this tower, and it was very, very hot in there.
Oh.
and a little bit moist. It's the middle of
Mhm.
summer. A million people have gone up there before us. And we started up, and I just was thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know, this maybe feels too much, but I kept going because I'm that fear of missing out. And I always want to say yes. I'm okay going up. A bunch of people pushed past us, really nice. But we got to the second floor. And at that point, there were no more windows going up.
Oh,
And I
okay.
thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to go up 7 more flights of stairs in the dark in this moist kind of setting. And I
Yeah.
said to my husband, you know, okay, I can do this as long as there are none of those monkeys inside this tower. And that's when I heard this rabid sounding, pretty irritated sounding monkey noise from right above me in the dark. And I was like, no, that's it. And I turned on my heels. My husband asked me if I was okay. And I just kind of palmed my way down back out of the tower and into the fresh air. And he continued on up because I reassured him he was, fine to go without me, which of course he is. But it was a big, big, big moment for me because I listened to my gut and I listened to my heart, as opposed to what I had done my whole life, which was I should summit the tower. I have to do this. I have to say yes. I have to, push through my fears. I have to be brave all the time. And it seems like a very small incident maybe to someone else, but to me, it was a major moment of, wait a minute, I do not want to go up in this tower. For once in my life, let me say no.
And that's pretty powerful. And, I was talking to a guest the other day about the fact that, I asked them, do you think that maybe our expectations that we put on ourselves, such as the tower here, is it because we are taught that these are the expectations of others that we then put into our own mind to have to live up to them, to live up to somebody else's standards, to live up to somebody else, what their ideal is, that in our heart, in our core, is not at all the case?
Oh, yes. I mean, I definitely think so. And I wrote a book, which I know we talked about, Bravish, Memoir of a Recovering Perfectionist. And I start the book out by outlining the family handbook that I received. And it's not a literal handbook,
Okay.
not an actual handbook.
Okay.
It's a metaphorical handbook that I received, my brothers received. I believe my parents received one. I actually believe everyone receives a handbook of some sort. And in our family handbook, it was, just do it. My mom had that long before Nike had it. It was, if you want it done right, do it yourself, which it took me decades to unlearn and start to learn to ask for help and accept help. Don't wash your dirty laundry in public, which I've learned as an artist to relate to people. If I don't share something genuine about myself, I'm really cheating the experience. So I had to unlearn a lot of things that I learned, and a lot of lessons that I honestly think in moderation are really great things to live by, but I was taking to excess. So rules that I lived by in excess, and those sort of propelled me into roles that I played out honestly for decades and decades until I became, aware, wait a minute, as you say, these are not the rules I want to live by. I want some gentler guidelines to start with, and let go of some of the things that I inherited and that I was playing out to excess. So I completely agree with you. This is all this stuff of, I felt like I had to do things and I had to be brave and I had to say yes. And no one was asking that of me except me and maybe the family handbook.
Well, and that's the thing about it is, we don't realize that we have these expectations put on us. And, whether people will look at certain aspects of your life. And the thing about perfectionism is you could look at my house. So my house is not very organized. It's not, and you could go to my office when I worked, and my desk had piles and stacks of paper all over it. And my boss would come back there and he's like, do you have this? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And I'd find it and he'd be like, how do you do this? The fact is though, when it came to something that I really, really cared about, work, not necessarily work, but my writing and things of that nature, that's when the perfectionism kicks in. When it's something creative, something that is my passion, I get very meticulous and perfectionism about it. And that becomes the problem where you shut yourself down.
Amen.
Because it's never good enough.
Completely agree. It never is good enough. And you're right. I think given what you do, and I love what you're putting out in the world, if it had to be absolutely perfect, you'd never issue a podcast episode, right? I mean, and that would kind of defeat the whole purpose of it. And so you're right. I've had to really, I struggle with that as a recovering perfectionist, that if I wanted to put a book out in the world, at a certain point, I actually had to push the button send to my publisher, as opposed to, and I was to the last second where I was like, oh, let me change one more word at 11:59 p.m. So I agree with you. It is someone said that perfectionism is the enemy of the good enough. And I have to remind myself of that every day. So I appreciate you understanding me.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at my first book that I wrote, I spent 30 years. I started writing it in the late 80s, and it changed various forms. But I kept toiling at it. And my husband, he would sit there and say, why are you so worried about this? I'm like, maybe I should go back to school and take a class. He's like, why? You are a storyteller. Well, maybe I should. So we went to Borders, and I'm sure you remember Borders books.
I do.
And somebody had given me a gift card for Christmas. So he's like, I'm just going to sit here in the aisle. I'm like, okay, if that's what you want to do. You don't want to look. No, I'm just going to sit here and look. Okay, fine. So he pulls some random book off the shelf. Mind you, I've left him there. I'm walking around. I grab my stuff and I come back and he's like, I have something to show you. I'm like, okay. He flips open this book. I don't know how many books he went through to find this. Every I think it was like every chapter ended with like 20 slash marks for no reason. And it was part of the paragraph. It wasn't that it was separating, it was part of the paragraph. And he looked at me and he said, this is actually in a bookstore. And you tell me you have issues? Get out of your way. And it took him going into dialysis and me writing at Barnes and Noble and I was creating a marketing a side project. And I created a diary for a bass player. And I would put it out every day. I didn't do it grammatically correct. You know why? Because it's his journal. There should be not this perfectionism in his journal, right?
Right.
So then I had rehab centers following me. And I'm like, okay, so obviously they think this dude is real.
Right.
So I decided to turn it into its own novel, and putting it out there, I did it whole hog. I had the opportunity to do a signing at Barnes because they were closing that location down. So I did everything a writer should not do. I created my own cover. I didn't hire an editor. I had some people check it, but it wasn't fully edited, and I put it out there.
Beautiful.
So that allowed me the freedom. Now I look back and I'm mortified. I have a bunch of copies of it and it's bad. And I've had an editor and I've got a different cover and I did all the right things. But I had to get over the perfectionism. And when you're talking about the podcast, I know this is your interview. When you're talking about the podcast, the very first interview I did, the sound was totally screwed up. And that was January of last year. I did not step back into doing this until March, because I was so up in my head. And now it's like, you know what? I do it. I put it out there. I do minimal editing. That way it's organic and real.
I love that.
So
I love that. And I'm sure that your book, when you put it out there, really touched people. And that's right.
It triggered some people.
Okay. Well, that's a way of touching people, right?
I had one review that I had one 3-star review. That's my lowest review I've gotten. And she wanted a book that had a happily ever after. And she wrote, she hated the characters, she hated the people, but she finished reading it. And I thought to myself, and my husband was like, are you okay with that? And I'm like, you know what? I am. He's like, why? I said, because I did my job. If I made her feel angry, then I did my job because I connected emotionally with her. And
Exactly.
as a writer, that's what you want to do. So even though it was a 3-star review.
Exactly. And we can't please all the people all the time, right?
No.
So good on you. I have a 2-star review, so I'm winning in that race. So
I got one better on TikTok. There was a woman that was talking about weird reviews on Goodreads, and somebody actually left somebody a 1-star review because they didn't like the genre the book was written in.
hello.
They didn't read the book, just didn't like the genre. So therefore they were
Overall.
giving the book a 1-star.
Oh my gosh.
Why?
Well, that's okay. That's nutty. Well, I feel
Anyway.
lucky that very, very young, when I worked for the Italian government travel office, and I used to do presentations on travel to Italy, which I loved to do. But one of my earliest presentations, this is well before you were probably a baby, but I was actually at a slideshow, anyone who remembers slides. And it went great. And at the end of it, 99 people stood up and applauded, which made me feel really good. And there was one guy in the front row who was actively snoring. And I realized, you know what? That's cool. He probably needed a nap.
Mhm.
And it really cured me early on in my life of the feeling that I was going to please every single audience member. But what I'm going for is just what you said. I want to connect with people emotionally on some level. And, you know, as you say, sometimes it's not what I intended, but
Right.
hey, if we make a connection as humans, that's what I'm going for. So I
Exactly.
love that story of yours. Congratulations on your books,
Thank
by
you.
the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, it's one of those things where you have to get out of your way. And I'm having that problem right now. I mean, my second book, I managed to write most of the meat of it in 33 days,
Ooh,
which is awesome.
wow.
However, my book I'm working on now, I thought it was done, and now I'm like, no, I'm gonna have to revise this thing. So
Ooh.
I'm in the perfection loop, I think, of trying to get the story just perfect. So
I hear
know,
you. Thank
it
you for
happens.
understanding me.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got Bravish, or is there another book that you're working on?
Not right now, because that one really, I didn't set out to write a memoir. And I have to admit, I started out writing my traveler's tales. And then as I wrote, the book really spoke to me, and it occurred to me, oh, I'm not writing just my story of living on 4 continents and visiting 50 countries. It became clear to me that I was also writing my emotional journey to re-find my creative voice in midlife, and my journey to put my own life first at last. So it became a memoir in the writing. And quite honestly, that is, as you know, you're having done a journal. It's a very intimate and it's a difficult journey. So I needed some time to regroup after doing that, quite honestly. And also after the challenge of braiding together a literal and emotional journey. What I'd really love to do next is some shorter things, maybe essays, things that bring me delight and that don't involve some massive braiding together 2 different storylines, but a little bit of having fun. You're a storyteller. I love doing live storytelling, and I think we're almost back to doing live storytelling again. I did a solo show that I love doing about growing up with my mom, and I'd really love to do something around my dad, a solo show around my dad. So a lot of creative things ahead of me, but it sure isn't going to be another memoir again. So no, that nearly killed me.
Well, I meant, maybe you dabble into the fiction pond.
I always thought I would write fiction, and that's that I would love to try that. I just the muses would have to inform me there, but I would, yeah, I would love to try anything creative.
So who do you think instilled the perfectionism in you more so? School, parents?
Oh gosh. Well, as I say, with the Family Handbook, that helped a lot. And since I really loved school as a little kid, being good and being good at things is a very safe place for me. So I carried into adulthood, well into adulthood, the some behaviors that I think subconsciously kept me feeling safe. And so as long as I talk about in the book, when we first moved overseas, for me, I was following my husband's career, and I had let go of my own career. And that left me feeling very uncertain about who I was. And so I started to fill in that void with, oh, as long as I'm the perfect corporate spouse, as long as I'm the perfect tour guide, the perfect expatriate, the perfect, et cetera, all of these perfect roles allowed me to feel safe. And so I think that's a combination of just my growing up of what made me feel safe as a little kid, the Family Handbook, society rewarding us for being good, you know, and coloring within the lines. So a lot of things I needed to unlearn. So for me, I would say it's sort of a conglomeration of all those things. And the journey is to let go of using that sort of self-soothing to feel safe in favor of being who I really am, something bigger and louder and not as perfect, and letting go of some of the roles that I took on as a result of that, you know, the perfect this, the perfect that no one was asking me to do except me. So I don't know how you feel. I do think it's a combination of parents and family and society and school and
I think it's
culture.
I think it's a combination, and I think, you know, one thing I've talked about a couple of times with other guests, and I'm sure you can relate, is that we look at our parents as these perfect people. But there's a caveat there. But we like to blame our parents for who we became. But the fact of the matter is, we have to step back and look at the ancestry of our lineage, and we never do. I mean, what was our, you know, our grandparents were not the same people that they were to being parents for our parents, and it continues on and on and on. And if you start unpacking family trauma, that kind of unfolds things. When I look at my mom, when I would ask her, well, what do you want for Christmas? What do you want for your birthday? I want good grades.
Oh,
It didn't even matter if I had good grades, she'd still say that. So there was always this expectation of good grades. And I'm like, seriously, what do you want? I want good grades. So I got to a point after I got bored with school, because in sixth grade, I was in a school that I was, well, sixth grade, I was doing seventh grade work, and that school closed down. And so I ended up back at another school, and I'm doing the same exact textbooks as I was doing in seventh grade or sixth grade. So I was bored. And my mother's philosophy was, well, if you've already done the work, it should be easy. Well, yeah, but I'm bored. And come on, when you're that age, boredom is not a good thing with school. So she would tell me, you know, I'd be like, I want to do this. Okay, well, I need good grades. All right, I give you those good grades. And as soon as I got what I wanted, I go back to coasting.
okay.
Which is not something I'm proud of, but that's the truth. I mean, that's when and it goes back to expectations. I wasn't meeting her expectations. She wasn't meeting mine. She'd give me what I wanted. I'd give her what she wanted. And this was our relationship. But she would always have these expectations of, well, you'd be prettier if you lost weight. I wasn't fat. But that was her expectations because she was overweight. So this is, I mean, I can look back and see now these expectations, where they came from. But I don't think that everybody does. I don't think we all look at the school, you know, the fifth grade teacher, and I think I've talked about her before. She prided herself at the end of the year to give every student a half of a jackass trophy. And I'm talking, yes, a half of a donkey. Yes, this would not fly today. This was the 70s, folks. This would not fly. She didn't work there again, but this would not have flown. There's no way. And she gave everybody, she picked your flaw and gave you that trophy related to that flaw.
That's appalling.
It is. It's almost as appalling as the guy putting a gun to his head to teach fractions in class.
Okay, I'm afraid to know.
Guess what? Guess what? That was a Lutheran school.
Oh my gosh.
The other one was just a private school. So people talk about public schools. This is what you get sometimes in private school.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Stay safe out there, kids.
But I mean, these were things that, what expectations are you put upon? And I know that kind of digresses, but how can you feel good? You know, here you are getting ready to go into sixth grade, and here's a jackass trophy for you.
Not cool. Not cool.
And it sticks with you.
It absolutely does. It does. And I don't think it's at all, for me, not a digression, because I think that's exactly what I'm talking about, is what our parents inherited, what they struggled with. And then, you know, it's been, at least for me, a process of, I talk about early on being unconsciously incompetent, that I didn't even know when we moved overseas and I felt really adrift. I didn't even know that I was feeling lonely or angry or sad, because that really wasn't acceptable growing up. And I think for my parents, that wasn't acceptable. I had to learn in this day and age, as you say, generationally, it was a different time. It's okay to have all those emotions. So becoming, for me, consciously incompetent. Wow, I'm feeling these things. I don't know what to do with them. And now, a little bit later in life, trying to become more consciously competent in terms of expressing who I really am without the layer of all the generational things that our parents inherited and then passed on to us. As you say, someone who struggles with one issue themselves may put it on their kids. So I'm hoping to be awake to what I'm really feeling and what I really want to do. So
Well,
it's a journey for me, at
yeah.
least.
Well, it's a journey for all of us if we're aware of it. I mean, a lot of the times we look at our parents, we take what they said, and the one thing that my generation, and I know your generation, would sit there and hear is kids should be seen and not
Right.
heard.
Right.
And dare you speak up, you're gonna get either spanked, put in the corner, or you're gonna get talked to. I had a mouth on me occasionally, especially as I got older. Yeah, gee, big surprise here. And it got me in trouble. I wasn't a bad kid, but my mouth sometimes would get me in trouble. You dare not, because I grew up in New Orleans. So it was yes, ma'am,
Okay.
yes, sir, no,
Mhm.
you wouldn't, if I ever made the mistake of responding with, yeah, yeah, that wasn't a good way to respond.
Good one.
And now when you look at the younger generation, yes, sir, no, sir, those things, sometimes they exist, but most of the time they don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a lot more.
It's a choice for all of us as adults to, as a friend of mine reminds me, take what you need and leave the rest. Some
Mhm.
stuff I'm really, really super grateful to have inherited. And some stuff it's like, maybe not so much.
So what countries have you lived in?
Well, the book starts with our move from New York to Paris. Then we go to Cairo, Egypt, Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt, Chiang Mai, Thailand, Bangkok, Thailand, back to Chicago, back to Singapore, back to Chicago. So that's the journey in the book. So we've lived in many places, and my husband's from Switzerland, and he's lived in a few additional places. So yeah, the world is a pretty precious place to us. We feel very, very grateful to have explored a lot of the world. And I feel grateful to have learned from the world things that I might not have learned if I'd never left home. And I feel that absolutely the same for my country. You grew up in New Orleans. It's culturally, for any of us to move to a different part of the country is already can be a lot of learning. So I'm grateful for every place I've lived. The lessons are not always easy, but I always walked away richer from the experience.
Well, like, I went from New Orleans to Shreveport, and even though they're in the same state, and I'm going back now, Shreveport is a lot more advanced than it was. Like, going there in the 80s from New Orleans to Shreveport, it was totally different culture shock,
Interesting.
because there was certain things that you couldn't do there. It was more of a religious town. The dialect was completely different. I got accused of being from New York because there was more of a twang in Shreveport's accent at the time.
Interesting.
So, but New Orleans has their own dialect. It's more the Cajun French and the New York thing. They don't sound like they do in the movies most of the time, at least movies of the 80s. We didn't have the Southern drawl. No, I mean, but that's the thing. When you step out of your comfort zone and you're able to move somewhere else, whether it's just in the state or in the country, you're opening up your whole world.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. And even if people have a chance to go 5 blocks away from their home, I applaud that, because I think it's more a mindset of being open to what someone else might be thinking and how someone else might do things, as you say, within the state, within the country, within the world. That's a passion of mine.
What is your favorite place that you've ever been to?
Oh no. Oh, that's literally impossible for me
Okay.
to say. I have to say that's impossible. I will be politically correct and choose Switzerland
It's
because
neutral.
I'm married to a Swiss guy. No, I absolutely love
Okay.
Switzerland, and it's been a discovery for me as someone who's such a rule follower, as a recovering perfectionist, that Switzerland feels it's a very rule friendly place, but it also has a lot of attributes that I love, which is time with family, time with friends, eating. Nothing makes me happier than a meal with people I love. And Switzerland is really devoted to that. I also, my way of getting exercise is walking, and people walk a lot. I mean, you'll see 150-year-old people hopping by, greeting you on a little mountain path. And I really love that people are outside and uh, enjoying life. So let me say Switzerland. I could go on and on about every place we've ever been, so I won't.
When you were talking about the monkeys, it reminded me of the research I've done on Gibraltar,
Oh,
because there's apes den where there are monkeys, and they're wild monkeys, and you can feed the
see?
monkeys.
Oh, okay. Okay,
So
so you understand. You
yeah,
understand my monkey story. All
yeah,
right.
I did, because they're like, yeah, you have to be careful, because if you're not supposed to feed the monkeys, but if you have something shiny like a
Right,
sandwich or something, they're going to take it.
right.
Um, so they've gotten they have a lot of things that they do now with the monkeys, but for a while there, they used to come down to the city, and they would go into people's houses and take food
Oh,
and stuff. So they had
okay.
to start feeding them. So I understand the monkey story
Okay, thank you.
very much so. Um, what is one of the most amazing things you've done, you think? I mean, if you could look back at everything that you've done, what would be one of the most amazing things you've experienced when you were traveling?
Oh gosh, when we were traveling, um, well, I would honestly say the act of moving to a different country is life changing. So having done that several times, that's been amazing to me every time, to be permitted into another culture and to struggle my way through figuring out how I can be within that culture. In terms of amazing experiences, I would say a real highlight to us was going to the country of Bhutan, because it's as though you're stepping back in many ways a couple of hundred years. And that's pretty cool to me, that a lot of what we consider sort of modern society is not there. It's just not there. And they haven't been open to tourists for a long time. And we had some very funny experiences there with, would you like to go visit my cousin's farmhouse? Oh, yes. Fear of missing out. Yes, I would. And trying some of the snacks, which, oh boy, I'll try anything, but whoo, I was not expecting some of that. So I would say every time I've said yes to something that pushes me, as you said, a little outside my comfort zone, it's been amazing. We had the privilege of having a hot air balloon ride in Africa, and
Mm.
just the notion of seeing the vastness of Africa, that blew my mind. So that was really one of those moments.
So now we're going to go back to your perfectionism. I know I jump around a lot, but
I
that's
love it. I love it.
if you're having a conversation with somebody, that's what you do.
That's right.
So did you have to forgive yourself?
Oh, I love that question. I love that question. I think I have to forgive myself all the time. Oh, hey, buddy.
That's
Who's your
Chloe.
friend?
That's Miss Chloe.
Hi, Miss Chloe. Thanks for
Right.
visiting. I love how she's like, I gotta be here. Gotta be here.
She's like, well, there's treats back there. That's where,
Oh, treats. All right, sweet. Yeah, I get that too, Miss Chloe. I get it. I would say yes every day, every day. And I had to learn that people who read the book will see that I go through the journey of stopping drinking at a certain point in my life. And there's a lot of forgiveness there, of realizing that I really expected myself to be the only person who was perfect. I mean, I'm a perfectionist, but only for me. Everyone else, I'm completely fine if they're human. And so that process really allowed me to take a look at that notion of forgiveness. Am I not also entitled to forgiveness for what I've done, what I haven't done?
All right.
So yeah, absolutely. And do I have to forgive myself for not being perfect? Yes. Do I have to forgive myself for still struggling with the feeling that I should be? Yes. I love that question. That's a beautiful question to me.
Well, I think a lot of us don't forgive ourselves. I mean, we make a mistake and then we just let it fester. And I mean, I'm guilty of it. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I'm preaching here. Oh, no, I'm guilty of it. I mean, people that say that they have no regrets. I can sit here and say I have no regrets, but the truth is, I think everybody has some regret. I don't care how small it is. Everybody's got something where you look at that moment, and it's better too. Was it better to have made that choice than another?
Right.
Where would your life be? You can look at those two different intersections, and a lot has to do with forgiving yourself for making that choice. If it didn't turn out the way you thought it would, you have to forgive yourself.
That's a beautiful way of looking at it. It's that whole notion of the road not taken. I was just, in fact, having breakfast with a friend who had a very different path than I did. And you're right. I actually don't believe people who say they have no regrets. And I've heard that many times. I've been able to let go of a lot of my regrets, but I still have some regrets. And there is always a sense of the heart of your podcast. Was it better to have followed my husband's career? Was it better to have, stopped trying to have children as opposed to pushing forward, when we were faced with kind of the end of the line in terms of the infertility? Was it better to have, yeah, I mean, we have to make choices, and it's hard. And the key, do we forgive ourselves for the choices we make and that life makes for us sometimes?
Yeah, I read cards on the side.
Love that.
And there's a card, there's the hangman. And the greatest way to look at the hangman is you need to make a choice. If you don't make a choice, the choice is going to be made for you.
Okay.
And I think that happens a lot to us. We're like, oh, well, I'm going to keep delaying this. I'm going to keep pushing it back. I'm not sure if this is the right thing to do or not. And then a choice is made. And if that choice isn't what we want, then we start getting upset and we can blame whatever. And it's like, but you didn't take the action. And so then you can actually say, well, then it wasn't my fault. I mean, I think there's a way, some people will do that. So as opposed to taking the action, because then, well, the chips fall where they may. Well, that's true, but
yeah,
I
I agree. And I'm a big believer that literally everything I do every day is a choice. And people push back at that sometimes. They're like, well, you have to breathe. It's like, well, no, you could choose not to breathe. You have to pay taxes. Well, I could choose not to pay taxes. I mean, there are consequences for my choices, but that absolutely has changed my life. That notion of what you're saying, I can pretend that I'm not making a choice, but I'm still making a choice. Even if I choose not to commit to something, it's still a choice. So that's very powerful to me. And I do know that in writing this book, I did at a certain point have to make the choice, as we said, am I going to write the doggone book? Or am I going to continue saying, oh gosh, life got in the way. Oh, I was so busy living other people's lives, quite honestly. Or, oh, I was so busy people pleasing, to be honest. There comes a point at which a coach of mine, my solo show coach, I said, oh, I think I'm too old to do this now. And she grabbed me by the proverbial lapels and said, girlfriend, it is not too late, but it is getting too late. And that lit a fire under me, I have to say, because to your point, I could continue making up all the excuses in the world, or I could do what I'd been saying I was going to do for a long time.
Yeah. Well, and I want to go back to something you said about losing your identity in a way. I appreciate the fact that I assume you've been married for a long time to the same gentleman, and the fact that he supported you and you finding your own identity is a huge thing. I mean, when I look at my first husband, when I left that situation, I had to relearn who I was because I had such narrow parameters, and I was 27 at the time. So I had these narrow parameters of who I thought I was. And I can look back at that person and I don't recognize her. And even with my husband passing, I had to relearn who I was without him. And that's still a daily thing, because you, especially when you're married for a certain amount of time, that person and you become, if you have a really tight marriage, you become each other. You have that bond with that person, that you know how they're feeling, you know when they're in a mood, you know that, and you know that they love you. So when that's gone, it's like, okay, now I have to figure out who I am and see me for who I am, and not the perfectionism, not the perfect version. Because the problem with this is, and I say this to anybody that's over 40, don't look at yourself in pictures when you were 20 and think, I'm going to get back to there, because your body's not going to let you. Gravity has happened. If you look at celebrities, unless they've had work,
Right.
they're in their age, they have middle age spread. Everybody's got something. It's genetics, it's hereditary, accept who you are. And that's the thing. You have to get to a point where you get away from perfectionism, even about your own personal appearance, because even there we are placed. Now that's a great place to look about perfectionism, because we are sold, and we've been sold for years, magazines, Vogue, Bazaar. Here's this perfect woman. Look what the celebrities look like. Okay, well, they have somebody cooking for them, possibly in some cases. They have a personal trainer. They have a stylist. Are
They
they
have
really?
an airbrushing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, and as you say, gravity happens, y'all. It's like, it's like we're on a planet that gravity happens. So I completely agree with you. First of all, I'm sorry sorry about your husband.
It's been over a year, a little over a year.
I'm so sorry.
So it's okay. Thank you.
And now you have that kind of beautiful marriage that is a big loss. And
Yeah.
as you say, are redefining who you are without that person. So I am sorry.
Thank you. The one thing I will say though about that is, not everybody has that kind of love. And just like with your situation with you, I'm sure your husband loves you if he was willing to support you through you re-identifying yourself and owning yourself. Because most men would say, it's done, I'm out of here. So I appreciate the fact that you had that stability. Same thing with me. I had a husband that he was legally blind. So that was the other thing for me. It was like, he was legally blind. I didn't have to care how I looked. And doing these, I have to put an image out there. So I had to like myself again, love myself again. So yeah, it's been a whole learning process, and not getting caught in perfection.
Right on. Right on. Well, yes, I do really credit my husband, because I talk about it in the book. At a certain point, every year, my husband and I on New Year's Day come up with what we call mottos. And it's really words to live by. So for years, when I was caring for my parents, when they were at the end of their lives, every year I was like, be here now, be here now. I just wanted to try to be present with my parents where they were as they were, really dying. And at a certain point, my husband said, this year, Margaret, it's a hello. This year, Margaret, it's got to be a different motto for you. And he said, for me, that year had to be me first, not him first, me first, which was really one of the kindest things he's ever done in an almost 30-year marriage. And I did say, you do know what that means for you, right? And he laughed and said, I do know what that means for me. And it's time. And so as you say, to have someone who supports me being me is an incredible gift. I do not take that for granted. Now he teases me. It's been a few years. He said, I thought that was for 1 year only, I'm like, no, I'm keeping that one. So that's been, as you say, that's a gift. That's a huge gift to have anyone in our lives who supports us being who we are, imperfectly who we are.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many people. I mean, it's very easy when you get married to lose yourself in it. It's very easy. And I mean, I'm guilty of it, after being with my husband for so long, and then him being ill, and I've talked about this at other times. The fact is, my primary care doctor, after my husband passed, said, and she was both of our doctors. She's like, do you realize how much stress you were under? And I'm
Oof.
like,
Yeah.
no, because here's the thing. When you're living it, you don't see it. It's with anything. Just like you don't see that you're being the perfectionist. It's your natural habitat, dare I say.
Right.
It's
So
your
true.
it's your natural habitat. So when you get married, so many women I've watched, including myself, especially in my first marriage, I totally lost myself.
Mhm.
And I've talked to other people, other women, and they're like, yeah, well, my husband handles everything. My husband handles all the bills. I don't know what's going on financially. I don't know anything. And I'm always blown away by that, because it's like, what happens if he's coming home from work one day and he gets in a car accident?
Right.
Not only do you not have your own identity, you have no knowledge of how to survive.
Totally agree with you.
But that goes back to your handbook, doesn't it? That some
Well,
people are taught to be the good little woman.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. For some people, I didn't get that message, but
Me
you're
neither.
so right. Some people absolutely, the man should handle this or that or whatnot. So I agree. Sisters, I'm just telling you right now, totally agree with Donna. Learn about your finances. Take care of yourself. Put your life jacket on first, y'all.
I
So
mean,
yeah,
my mom, freshman orientation, my mom had to write me a letter, and both my parents were, but my dad didn't. But my mom wrote me a letter, and the gist of the letter is, I mean, she apologized about not being necessarily the mom I wanted, blah blah blah. But the one thing that she said, she's like, I say this to you, and I say everything with love. I do what I do because I want you to be a strong woman.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful message from your mom.
And when I look at that letter, it's like, well, she got what she wanted. Because
Good.
You'd have to be strong to go through everything and to be able to persevere.
Right. Right.
So,
yeah. Yay, Mom.
Yeah, well,
I mean, they're not perfect. We're not perfect. No one is. No parent is.
No.
We're doing the best we can.
So, what you want to do a show with your dad about your dad? Now, what would that consist of?
It was really interesting to explore my growing up with my mom as an adult, really what we learned about one another and becoming friends and letting go a lot of the Facebook, the handbook things. And I'd really like to explore with my dad, because near the end of his life, I had a really wonderful therapist who helped point out to me, I was scrambling so hard to try to make my dad happy at the end of his life. And after I had scrambled so hard to try to make my mom well, when that wasn't going to happen. And so I learned a lot about myself, and I would really like to examine that. But I'd also really love to honor my dad, because it was like growing up with a very smart, very kind Dr. Seuss. I mean, he was a really smart guy, but, totally any imagination I have and my storytelling, I credit my dad with a lot of my creative DNA. So that would be fun for me to honor him in that way. And it would be fun to do another solo show. I enjoyed the intimacy of being on stage with an audience, even though, again, as a perfectionist, at first I was like, oh, can we turn the light down? And my director was like, hello, it's a solo show. You do know people are coming to see you. It's like, oh, well, I would feel more comfortable a little bit better. She's like, no, step forward. So good learning there. But I think it would be fun to honor him in that way and explore that, the humanity of someone I love very much.
You're talking about being on stage, and that I was going somewhere else, but this popped in my head, and it reminded me of the first time I was on stage playing bass, and we were playing a Beatles song, and we had practiced it. We had everything down, and I played the wrong note in the but it was in the same arpeggio. So nobody else knew. Nobody else knew. But guess what? Yes, right? The perfectionism was right there. And my boyfriend, who was the guitar player at the time, was like, let's go out to a bar afterwards. Okay. Yeah, I got really, really drunk because I was in my head, even them, I'm like, I screwed up. They're like, when? I didn't notice anything.
Right.
But that perfectionism,
right.
it So I can see where you were talking, and this wasn't even part where I was going either. I can see when you were talking about forgiving yourself about drinking. Perfectionism, if you're not perfect and you're not living up to your standards, you need a way to cope, whether it's,
Right.
when I was super stressed, I would eat a pint of ice cream. I'm not going to lie.
Right.
So it's no different than wanting
No.
to have a drink.
Oh, exactly. I always say to people, it's it's either eat a pint of ice cream, or in my case, when I stopped drinking, it was after a night when I had bought too many pair of earrings online, which sounds like I love earrings. I still have those earrings, but it occurred to me, wait, I'm trying to fill up a hole in myself with something external. It's food or work or romance, or as you say, it doesn't matter, whatever I'm using to make those bad feelings go away, or the shame or the guilt or the bewilderment, I can distract myself from what I'm really feeling. So my goal now is to be awake to, oh, I'm really feeling something, and not make it go away by using something else. I agree with you. A pint of ice cream, I'm a big fan. Totally get it. Totally get it.
Though now you made me actually have food for thought here, because, well, dealing with grief, it's like going through that whole process. I remember last year in September, October, November, I felt like even though I was going through it, I was doing things outside. I was making myself over. I was changing how I looked.
Mm.
And now when I look, and then at a certain point when I quit doing all that, that's when the grief started taking hold. And it's like, I understand now. It's like, yeah, it was the outside distraction.
Right.
And then finally, when you don't have that outside distraction, you have to face it. And it's not always easy.
It's not always easy. It's not always easy.
You had mentioned something a little earlier about fertility. So did you end up just not having kids at all?
We didn't. We tried for years and years and years. And that was a really terrible time in our marriage. Terrible time in our marriage. I'm lucky to say that it forced my husband and me to learn to communicate better, because we really needed that. I was really wanting to share how desperately sad I was, and my husband was retreating into himself. Neither one is right or wrong, but we really needed to learn to talk to each other. So we got that out of it. Thank you. And I also, it was a really awful time. And I think what was also awful was, it felt like everyone else was having kids, and people were constantly asking me, when are you going to have children? It's like, you don't know that you're putting a knife in my heart every
Right.
time that you ask that. So I do like to share that story now, because I think it's still, if not a taboo, I think people still don't talk about it. People assume, oh, people can get pregnant whenever they want to, and it's just not true. So I like being the face of, it's life doesn't always turn out the way we think it
No,
will.
no, it doesn't. Um, the thing about, and the thing about having kids, when you were talking, people would ask you, so when are you going to have a kid? And I mean, for a long time, my grandmother was always like, so when are you going to give me a grandbaby? I had two stepdaughters, and I considered them my kids. I raised them for 4 years. They were my kids, and everybody would get after me about how they're not your kids. They're not blood.
Mm.
Well, is it any different than adoption? But
Right.
then I'm going to say this. I just had an interview with a gentleman who was adopted. And at 8 years old, he found out that he was adopted. And that sent him on this whole spiral for most of his life.
Wow.
So while adoption is good, there are certain caveats that, you bring up. For him, it was an abandonment issue, which can be the same thing for a child from divorce. But you wouldn't equate the two when you look at them to be related. But it can be.
I totally hear you. Yeah, I mean, that's for me a road not taken, but I'm not saying that. My friends who have children, they always say it's the greatest joy of your life, it's the greatest heartache of your life. So it's my reality, but it was a very, very, very difficult chapter. So I'm grateful it forced us to get help, because we needed help. So to anyone listening out there, there's help out there for any of these things, right? I mean, that's something I really, if there's one lesson to my younger self or to anyone I would share is ask for help, accept help, which I, as a perfectionist and with the rule book, I didn't know. It's like, ask for help, accept help. That's been the biggest lesson of my life is people want to help. People don't want me to be perfect. They want me to be human.
I think that's the one thing that when, back to my mom for a sec, when they split, her and my dad, she made sure I went and saw a therapist. That being said, well, I was also acting out. I forged her signature. I was a little terror. So, I mean, but she got me into therapy. And the sad thing is I did such a bad forge job. And then on top of it, when I got confronted by the teacher's like, so did your mom sign in? Well, no, she was sick last night. She wasn't feeling good. Now, this is the mind of a fifth grader.
Right.
And so she asked me to sign it.
Oh.
I had detention for the rest of the year after school.
Busted.
Yeah. So, but that being said, she made sure I got some therapy, and that allowed me to say, okay, I know when I need to go back and talk to somebody, because yeah, your friends are great and everything, but you need that person that firstly has a clinical background, secondly can look at something in a very more diverse way.
Totally agree. And objective. And I always say whenever I've gone to a therapist, it's like when I feel like I'm at a door that I want to go through it, and I can't figure out how to get through the door. So my experience has always been people help open up that door, just even if it's a crack, so I can kind of go through.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, with mental health and, whether it's perfectionism, and I know some people are like, well, that's not a mental health issue, but it is, because it creates this whole loop in your head. Exactly. And the thing is, and I've said this many a times on here, it's not only a habit, it's an addiction, because you can fall right back into that perfectionism, I'm sure, very quickly. Yeah.
You're just about to snap your fingers. Yeah. That's how fast. You're right.
Yeah. So you're right. You need to find a way to get help if you need help. I mean, there's nothing, it used to be very taboo if you went to talk to a psychologist. Oh my gosh, you must be insane. No, I'm actually very sane, because I'm willing to get help.
Yes, exactly. That I love that message. I love that message, because I think you're right. There's still some hesitancy around people. Some people just don't feel it's right that they should be able to do it on their own. And I'm not going for that anymore. What I'm going for is just to be a human being. I'm just another bozo on the bus. I just want to, like try to live a decent life and let people help me and try to help other people too.
I think if we could get there, because I mean, right now we are so divided, if we could just lose some of the labels and just embrace each other as human instead of this or that or whatever, it's almost like you're drowning in toxicity if you turn on the evening news. And how are you going to feel better if we're always living in fear?
Totally agree. Let's swap out fear for love. That would be my hope. And hope.
So you also do Instagram stories, correct? Do a lot of Instagram stuff?
I do. I love Instagram. I absolutely love Instagram. I'm a very visual person. And so that's a fun way for me to share the world. And I love to see other people's vision of the world.
Do you do any other kind of art besides photographs?
Not so much, unless you consider improv. I love improv. That's just fun for me, and another way to let go of perfectionism, because as you know, things go wrong, and you played the wrong chord. Oh, God forbid, right? I get it. That's why I love storytelling too. The possibilities for things to go wrong, and no one cares. If I forget a line, no one cares. They just wait patiently. They're there to hear a story. They're there to connect. So my art is Instagram for visual, and then anything connecting is my other art.
And I understand about improv. That's the one thing about improv, there is no perfection. You can't.
Right.
And even I remember taking in my scene class, my final exam for my scene class in the college, I flubbed the line, but I was working with the teacher's assistant. She was my partner, and she ad-libbed a line and got us right back on track, and nobody knew.
Sweet. That's a
Exactly.
friend. That's a
Yeah.
pal, right?
Yeah. And I mean, your monologue, you do as best as you can and you try to
Right.
remember everything. And there's incidents because talking to you, I'm realizing it's like, yeah, you didn't get caught up in the perfectionism. And that's something I got to get out of is being perfect when it comes to writing.
Mm.
But that's the funny thing as a writer. We do the reason why I'm laughing is you can look in the grammatical English language now, and you can go on TikTok, and there's so much slang, and everybody's using slang. But in the written word, everything has to be perfect. But why? We don't talk perfectly.
Exactly. We don't.
So,
So,
especially like in a journal, when you're reading somebody's journal, do you expect it to be grammatically correct?
no. Maybe my own journal, yes, I do, but no one else's. You're right.
Yeah,
You're right.
yeah. So, where is your next trip you plan on taking? Or do you plan on
Going to Washington, D.C. in a couple weeks. My book guru, one of my best friend from college and his husband, we go see them whenever we can. So that's my next trip.
Nice. Any travel overseas planning, or just because of COVID?
We'll go back to Switzerland for Christmas. So
nice.
Looking forward to that too.
Nice.
Yeah.
So do you have a second home there, or is that just, you just go over there?
We spend time with my husband's family.
Okay. Okay. It's very nice. So I guess people can get your book on Amazon, correct?
They can, or they can order it from any bookstore in the world can order the book, which is cool. But yes, it's available on Amazon. I'm very grateful to anyone who chooses to buy the book and to journey with me. And I really, really appreciate this time together to talk about topics that are deeper, and have meaning. So I really appreciate you sharing this time with me, Donna.
Well, thank you. I still have a couple questions for you, but
oh, great. Okay. Okay.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's go back to your better to moment. So was it better to have stopped in that tower?
Yes. Yes, for sure.
Do you ever think that maybe you stopped because if you would have continued, it might have taken you out physically?
I was at that point. I was absolutely at that point. And I do regret not getting to the summit of that tower. I'm not saying it's without regret, but it was better to have listened to my heart and my gut. And yes, my physical well-being at that point. You're right.
Yeah. I mean, I was just, the way you described it, it makes me wonder if maybe this wasn't your intuition telling you, hey, and while it's sacred and wonderful and everything, you have to take care of you. So if there's one piece of advice you could give anybody, what would it be?
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, I really do believe ask for help and accept help, that people want to help, and no one expects us to be perfect except ourselves. So take advantage of all that love and support out there.
And it's okay to repeat, because sometimes we have to hear it on repeat in order to get the message.
Thank you.
So I thank you, Margaret, for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
For me too.
Thanks, guys, for tuning in to the Better To podcast. Your listenership is greatly appreciated. If you like what you hear, remember to hit subscribe. We also have our videos on YouTube. They're usually posted the same day as the podcast, and you should check it out. If you have a question or you would like to be a guest on the show, please drop me an email, and I'll be glad to talk to you about it. The email is Donna, Dauna, at thebettertopodcast.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and catch you next time.